My golden kid sister smashed my new phone, which I got for myself, because I did not buy one for her. So I sold her MacBook and retained the proceeds. My sister is our family's golden child and has been from birth. My parents had always wanted a girl and were overjoyed when they discovered that my youngest sibling was going to be one. I, on the other hand, was a boy who came first and was unsuccessfully terminated. My parents have always preferred my younger sister, though they have never said it outright. Their behaviors make this extremely evident. I am 16 years old, and my sister is 14. My parents have already purchased her a car, and my father is teaching her to drive. My sister's accomplishments and special occasions have always been celebrated as long as I can remember. She received presents on my birthday. She gets to choose the cake on my birthday. She got to choose all of the family activities we conducted. If we ever went to the cinema as a family, like we did one year for my birthday, my sister got to choose the film. I have vivid memories of that day. Avengers: Endgame had just come out, and it was all the rage at the time. I was 12 at the time, and absolutely wanted to see it. However, my sister opposed and insisted on going to see the Lego movie. After some back and forth, my folks basically told me to be the bigger person and let her have her way. We ended up going to see the Lego movie. One thing that stung a lot was how much my sister loved my parents' partiality, and how she took every opportunity to wrong me, while assuring me that our parents would always be on her side. Things like her snitching on me for things I didn't do, just so I might get in trouble, were typical. I gave up hope that things would change. 2 years ago, instead of attending my middle school graduation, my parents took my sister to a museum. That night broke my heart, but I think it was also necessary. It was the day I stopped expecting anything from my parents and began to provide for myself. Stuff like this has happened my entire life, and that is a major reason why I am not connected to my family. Nowadays, I would describe my sister and my parents as roommates, and my primary concern is my sister's behavior. My parents' years of spoiling and treating her like a princess have left her feeling quite entitled. She expects her birthdays to be spectacular. She expects to constantly have the latest technology and attire, and she possesses a Gucci purse. The one thing she doesn't have is the latest iPhone. That is something I have, or had. You see, I've been working a part-time job for the past year and a half, saving as much as I can. I still had an iPhone 6 until 2 weeks ago, which was my first phone, purchased by my parents when I was 14. I had saved up more than enough money to purchase the most recent iPhone, which is exactly what I did. I recall returning home from the store, new phone box in hand, ecstatic with my new purchase. I was able to utilize it for around a day without interruption. When I heard my sister moan about how I had it, "Why do you get a new phone while I am stuck with this old piece of crap?" she asked me. She was referring to her old iPhone 13. I informed her that I worked for it, saved for it, and opted to purchase it for myself. My sister then asked me why I didn't get her one. I was expecting this from her, so I answered by informing her that her current phone is still new. It's still new. She did not work for a new one, so don't expect me to get her one. She was, of course, dissatisfied, and went upstairs to tell her mother, as is typical of my sister. I knew what was about to happen, and mentally prepared myself for the debate that was about to take place. My mother came down a minute later, questioning why I hadn't bought my sister a new phone. And I told her the same thing. I informed my sister she wasn't happy, and she told me that families give gifts for one another. I then questioned Mom why, if that's the case. She got my sister a car when she was 13 and I still don't have one at 16. And she said that it was because my sister did not have a job. I yelled bullcrap right there, and told my mother that I am sick of the obvious favoritism that occurs in our house every day. That I am tired of my sister being treated like royalty, while I am treated like a peasant. And if they honestly want me to spend my hard-earned money on a new phone for my sister, they must be mad. My sister and mother ganged up on me, demanding that I buy her a new phone, and the conflict concluded with me leaving the house for a walk. I returned a few hours later, only to be met with another debate, this time from my father, about how I should get my sister a new phone. I did not participate in it, however, and went upstairs to sleep for the following week. I was repeatedly berated into getting my sister a new phone, and each time I refused, my sister became increasingly enraged. She even screamed at me once, telling me that I should purchase her a new phone. She also threatened to shatter my phone or hurl it against the wall unless I got her a new one, but her warnings seemed as empty as I expected. There was no way she was going through with it. So, about 6 days ago, I awoke to my phone not being at my bedside, as well as a crashing bang downstairs. I knew it was only my sister and me in the house, with both of my parents working. Despite the fact that it was the weekend, I went down to investigate the disturbance and found my sister. My phone was on the table and was repeatedly smashed with a hammer. By the time I saw it, it had been completely ruined beyond repair. And when my sister saw me, she smiled and said, "Oh, that was an accident. Maybe you should have gotten me a phone after all." I looked at her in disappointment and informed her I no longer saw her as my sister before picking up what remained of my phone and taking it upstairs. I tried my hardest to switch it on, but it was in vain. She had completely damaged it. Later that day, I informed my parents what had happened. But they didn't believe me because my sister said that I had simply dropped my phone, as if dropping my phone would result in full shattering. In any case, my parents declined to take action, and my sister destroyed it because there were no cameras or evidence. I couldn't go to the cops about it. It was around this time that I had enough. The same night, while she slept, I took her brand new MacBook and advertised it for sale, significantly undercutting retail prices. The MacBook was hardly touched. She doesn't use it often, therefore, it was in excellent condition. The next day, I was able to get someone interested in the MacBook and sold it. I completed everything without any of my family members noticing. I was able to sell the MacBook for very close to the price I paid for my phone. I also studied phone repairs and discovered that it was feasible to repair my phone. It would be expensive, but less than a new phone and less than the amount of money I paid for my sister's MacBook. I'll head down to the repair shop in a few days. What's wonderful about this circumstance is that my sister has yet to detect that her MacBook is missing. This is how entitled she is. She isn't even aware that her current MacBook has gone missing because she doesn't use it. My family and I are now not communicating, which I am really pleased about. So my sister and parents found out what had transpired, and a shitstorm erupted. A shitstorm so powerful that I was disowned and had to be taken in by my best friend's family, where I am now living. It took my sister over a month to detect that her MacBook was missing. She wanted to watch Netflix on it one day and got upset when she couldn't find it. I was smiling to myself the entire time as I saw my dad and her dash around the house, flipping everything up and down in an attempt to find it. My sister eventually asked me why I was laughing, and I told her that seeing her freak out over her MacBook was funny, which made her even angrier. She suffered a psychotic collapse after trashing the entire house for 3 hours in search of it. By the end, my parents had accused me of stealing the MacBook. In some ways, they were correct, but I refused to recognize it. Unfortunately, they found out that night when I was sleeping, when my mother took my phone and searched through it. I had made the mistake of leaving eBay and my account on my phone, where they could see that I had posted the MacBook a month before. My mother and sister woke me up in the middle of the night, while I was still confused and tired. I told him, "So what now? Let me get back to sleep." My sister burst, landed on top of me, and began kicking me. This drove me to shove her off and get out of bed. As the adrenaline kicked in, they both continued to shout at me, leaving me with no alternative but to yell over them. I informed them that what I did was no different than what she had done. If anything, it wasn't the same because I didn't sell her MacBook out of jealousy. My sister continued to deny ever smashing my phone, and my mother sided with her, asking whether I was still concerned about it. I answered her yes, but then I told her how much I dislike living in this madhouse with them. My father was working the night shift on that particular day, therefore, he was nowhere to be seen in the house. The night ended with my mother demanding that I buy my sister a new MacBook, or else they would pursue charges, and I told her to proceed. Pressing charges in circumstances like this never ends. There is no way to establish that my sister did not grant me permission to sell the laptop, because their word is not sufficient evidence. My mother, recognizing I was correct, told me that either I paid the money back or I could go. So that is what I did. The next day, I packed my belongings and left. My best friend knows about the circumstances at home and what I did, and he thinks it's hilarious. His folks are likewise wonderful and welcome me in. Not an issue. I've been living here for a week now, assisting with housework and paying a little portion of the rent, and I haven't heard from my parents or sister since the day I left. My golden child sister purposefully scheduled her wedding on the same day as our younger sister's graduation, so I encouraged my entire family not to attend the wedding. My third youngest sister, Erin, is the golden kid. She was the final planned child, and the two younger ones were both unintentional. Erin was meant to tie together our family. She was born prematurely, so I understand that my parents do coddle her to some level. However, it is no longer just that. Growing up, despite the fact that there were already 5 kids in the house, her needs were always prioritized before ours. Her birthdays became much more important, and both of my parents spent far more time with her than with any of us, giving her a sense of entitlement. Erin is getting married and recently informed us that she has moved the date forward due to a cancellation. However, The new date coincides with my second youngest sister, Nadia's high school graduation. Erin felt sympathetic, but she had already set the date for printing the invitations. My parents said that they would have to miss Nadia's graduation. We were all sympathetic to Nadia, but this was unintentional. Or so I thought. Nadia then told me and my older brother Leo that she was present when Erin received the news about the cancellation and proposed a new date. Nadia informed Erin that she was graduating that day, but Erin laughed and accepted the date regardless. This, as much as I hate to admit it, it sounds like something Erin would do. She scheduled her engagement party on the night of Nadia's 18th birthday. She also announced her engagement during my elder sister's wedding. It's all about her. When I asked Erin about this, she replied Nadia's high school graduation didn't matter. She wanted to marry the love of her life sooner. And our family had attended numerous high school graduations at this point. Anyway, here's what strikes me the most. Nadia has been looking forward to this for a long time. She's seen all of us graduate and had massive festivities hosted by her parents. I asked Nadia what she wanted, and she answered. She just wanted to have her day. So I told my family that Nadia and I would not be attending the wedding. My brother, Leo, has also dropped out. Everyone is upset. Erin is upset, and I didn't help matters by telling her that I could watch our other siblings marry, because it's all the same in her eyes. Mom is trying to persuade me to attend the wedding, because graduation isn't as significant. But I feel like if I don't, it would set a precedent in Nadia's life, that she will always be valued less than Erin. I've received texts calling me a hole, an idiot, and urging me to step up and be a decent brother. But that's exactly what I'm doing. My son is set to be the ring bearer, but given how my family is reacting, I'm considering pulling him out of my father's wedding. He told Nadia he'd take her to dinner after the ceremony. Nadia is currently staying with me since her mother won't quit cornering her. Update. It has been 2 days since the wedding, and a lot has happened. So, last Friday, Leo and I went to chat with our parents and my golden child, sister Erin. I wanted to inform them that I would be withdrawing my kid from the wedding. Our older siblings showed up as well. So it was only for standing up for her younger sister, Nadia. Leo had spoken to them the night before, and helped them see things more clearly through Nadia's eyes. Apparently, they didn't realize Erin had chosen the date on purpose. There was a lot of yelling. Erin accused me of attempting to undermine her wedding. Our parents attempted to persuade me to let them take my son to the wedding. But I held my ground. I felt stronger with my older siblings. Join me. After all, Erin and I are only separated by 2 years. Fortunately, the oldest, Lydia, was present. Her comments carry more weight as the eldest, and she didn't allow Erin or my parents the opportunity to disagree when she told them that Erin chose the date, openly admitting as much in front of me and Leo. And if this was regular behavior for Lydia, she warned them that if they continued to favor Erin so openly, the rest of us would leave. No contact. Our father began yelling, not at us, but at Erin. Surprisingly, I had never seen him so angry before, and seeing it directed at Erin was upsetting. Our mother begged us to go. We hadn't heard from anyone on that side until Monday, when Erin's fiancé, George, invited us to meet at our parents' house. He apologized to Nadia. He had no idea that the wedding and graduation coincided, or that Erin had done it on purpose. Our dad was the one who told him. What ensued was a lengthy discussion in which we all aired our frustrations. I told our parents that we all believed Erin was more valuable to them than any of us. Her artwork was constantly displayed on the refrigerator. Ours were usually kept in the drawer. I told him that as a mom, I couldn't imagine treating my child that way. Erin attempted to argue. She claimed that we were attempting to convert her into a horrible guy, trying to turn our parents against her and sabotage her wedding. Our mother advised her to be quiet since it was time for us to discuss. George stepped in and informed us that he did not expect us to attend the wedding, but we were welcome to attend the reception. He even went so far as to remark that he hoped he could have canceled the wedding entirely, but doing so would have cost him more money than bringing it ahead had. Mom's willingness to listen to us lasted less than 24 hours. By Tuesday, she had begged us to reconsider. Apparently, our feelings were irrelevant in the light of Erin's extreme stress and the possibility that people would question our absence on the big day. I haven't spoken to my mother since, although I did ask my father to send me some of Nadia's belongings because she will be living with me full-time. We have officially left. We have no communication with our mother. On Wednesday, Dad brought Nadia out to celebrate her early graduation. They had a daddy-daughter date, which I believe she truly needed. He apologized for many things and promised to do the same for the rest of us. But Wednesday was about her. I'm glad she had someone on one time with him. She was glad to see me in our sibling group chat. She stated that she believes Dad will try to make amends with us, even if Mom will not. Dad also arrived early yesterday morning to offer Nadia flowers. He told her how proud he was of her. George even called while preparing for his big day to congratulate Nadia, which I greatly enjoyed. We did not hear from Mom or Aaron. Our paternal grandmother ended up attending the graduation with us. It was a wonderful day. We didn't think about the wedding. I didn't think of Aaron. We simply had fun together. My son got to wear his aunt's hat and gown, and he almost drowned in the fabric. Our grandmother also tried on the headgear. We snapped photographs and mailed them to our father, who put them in a Facebook post. He wrote to congratulate Aaron and Nadia on their weddings and graduations. And we giggled about how that must have irritated our recently married sister. We went out to supper, and as siblings, we gave Nadia money for a week away with her best friend. Things are going great right now, but I doubt Aaron will keep things that way. Update 2. It's been 5 months since everything happened, and a lot has changed. It is unbelievable. So, shortly after their wedding, my sister Erin and her husband George left for their honeymoon, and our mother got into a frenzy. She wasn't used to not having anyone around. Someone was always visiting, usually Erin, but the rest of us would go out of responsibility and to see our youngest sisters, Nadia and Lexi. Erin is on her honeymoon, and the rest of us have no touch. Mom disliked the fact that she had no visitors. We began receiving phone calls from Erin the very next day she left. She attempted to persuade Nadia first, which our eldest sibling, Lydia, saw as a strategic move because Nadia is the most timid of the group and hence more likely to be persuaded. When Nadia turned her down, she shifted her attention to the rest of us. We all received identical phone calls from her, trying to encourage us to go visit her, understand her, and see things from Erin's eyes. She even mentioned Erin's early birth and how fortunate she was to be alive. Josh, my other brother, advised her to be more responsible with baby Lexi. Lydia blocked her phone number after the calls did not function. She started showing up at our homes. She repeated much of what she had said over the phone and before the wedding. She didn't understand what she had done wrong or why we were treating her this way. She called me ungrateful and disrespectful. She accused us of harboring unfounded jealousy for Erin and said that she loved us all equally. I did not respond to the comments. I was just trying to stop her from going inside and saying the same thing to Nadia, who was in the living room with my partner and son. Her words did not warrant a reaction, and after she was finished, I requested her to go as quietly as possible. But, honestly, I felt like crying. But who wouldn't feel bad when their mother yelled in their face like that, attempting to minimize years of agony by labeling it pointless envy? My siblings and I have been let down repeatedly by her and our father since Erin's birth. They have lost out on many things throughout the years, both great and small. But we had one thing they never missed, and we were content with just that. And that concludes our high school graduations. But they couldn't give it to Nadia. Erin broke her leg, so they were unable to attend Josh's college graduation. It was an accident. I understand, but they never made it up to him. They never celebrated this enormous accomplishment again, and he simply had to smile and bear it. Her mother did not attend my baby shower because Erin refused to go to one of them to have their nails done together. But our jealousy is unnecessary. When I asked her to go, she changed her tactics and began shouting out for my kid, attempting to entice him to come to her and telling me that she had the right to see her grandson. My partner stepped in because she was enraged and took my place by the door. Mom yelled some more, but she fled after my partner threatened to call the cops. Mom tried this song and dance with my older siblings, but she got nowhere. Then followed the Facebook posts, oblique rants about ungrateful individuals, and how strange it is that some children can so readily turn against their parents. Erin got involved during her honeymoon and called Lydia to chastise her for being nasty to her mother. But, as I've already stated, Lydia is upset and has had enough. Whatever she said to Erin kept her from contacting the rest of us. There was then a Facebook post about how it hurt to be separated from a grandchild. My mother's sister called, and there was a lot of yelling, including calling my fiancé the N-word. I blocked that number. I know Dad was attempting to persuade our mother to just leave us alone. He continued apologizing since she simply wasn't listening to him. Erin returned home after 2 weeks. She attempted to contact Lydia again, requesting that we all chat because we all clearly have difficulties to resolve. We did not show up. Erin was furious since she was not used to us failing to show up for her. While our mother was on a rampage, our father continued to attempt to do better for us, and he has made significant progress. He and I went out to eat together. We grabbed a drink, and he apologized. He didn't make a blanket apology to all of us about how sorry he is for hurting and neglecting us. Instead, he mentioned specific instances for which he wished to apologize. He reflected on all those years and identified specific situations for which he wished to apologize to me. I knew he did the same for the others, but hearing him apologize for things like canceling a fishing trip because Aaron needed him was unexpected. And I've never really enjoyed fishing. But I wanted to go on that vacation since I had seen it on television. I'd constantly see a father and son fishing together, and I wanted to have that. I wanted Dad to show me that I was a priority to him somewhere deep down. It did not happen. I never asked again. We went fishing a few days later, after he apologized. What began as a vacation for the two of us quickly turned into a family day out when my siblings expressed an interest in going fishing. First with my brother, then Nadia, and even Lydia, who dislikes the smell of fish. Dad brought the youngest, Lexi, and I brought my kid, and it was wonderful. It was one of the happiest days of my life. I'm terrible at fishing, but I'm really good at collecting seashells. That was great. When Dad returned home, our parents had an argument. The quarrel was primarily caused by Mom's confusion about why we were still in contact with him rather than her. She thought it offensive that we were trying to mend our friendship with him. She was upset that Dad wasn't pressuring us to forgive her or stopping us from behaving out. She was enraged that he did not extend an invitation to her, an errand for the fishing trip, and more so when he explained that their presence would make us uncomfortable. Mom began giving us the silent treatment a few months later, and after a month, my father left their home. Dad bore the brunt of her rage while we were subjected to the silent treatment, which took a toll on him. He was trying to do better by us, and she was attempting to villainize us, and he eventually informed her that if she did not accept responsibility for her acts, soon, he would contact a lawyer. Mom did not take him seriously. He's been staying in Lydia's guest room since his mother doubled down and said he was blind for not understanding how we were manipulating him. Unlike the rest of us, he evidently maintains regular communication with Aaron. According to him, she has even told her mother to reconsider what she is doing. Unsurprisingly, Aaron's involvement prompted Mom to relent. I'm not sure if she's thinking about how she treated us or quietly stewing. My narcissistic parents informed my golden child brother that he could take my house, and I could live in a camper, because I am unmarried, and he is married with children. I'm a single man in my early 30s, and my brother is 29 and has 4 children. His wife and I don't get along, because she often tries to get a rise out of me by appearing condescending and then becomes an intense, self-victimizing drama queen. If I retaliated against her in any manner, she would cry instantly and put on an extraordinarily convincing performance to elicit pity from almost anyone. My parents and brother adore her, despite the fact that they are fully aware of her true nature and do not care. She's incredibly attractive. I will offer her that. But she is so horrible that I could never be drawn to her. She also refuses to work despite having a college degree, and my mother cheerfully assists with the kids all day, leaving their income entirely dependent on my brother. This also means they cannot afford to live somewhere other than my parents' house. Growing up, my younger brother was likewise a clear favorite. He acquired a superiority attitude, because any retaliation against his pranks resulted in severe punishment. Back then, it was clear that my parents cared for him a lot more, because he got the lion's share of everything. And fewer people called them out on it, which happened rather frequently among other family members. So my parents packed us up and relocated us roughly 150 miles away from them. My brother was physically abusive to me on several occasions, flirted excessively with my first girlfriend until she broke up with me, and laughed at any disaster I experienced. When I was upset, my parents would just tell me to suck it up. I only received equal treatment when my parents needed to maintain appearances. I admit it was very amusing to see the expressions on their faces whenever they had to treat me equally with my brother, because other folks were present on birthdays and throughout Christmas. We had nosy relatives who liked gossiping and drama, so my parents tried to disguise what was actually going on and threatened to take away all of my belongings if I didn't keep my mouth shut. If anything, it made my parents happier when I turned 18 and moved out because it meant they didn't have to provide for me. I wasn't quite out with high school when I moved out, but couch surfing was far preferable to living with them. I've been keeping a low profile since leaving home. They didn't even show up for my high school graduation, but I didn't mind from then on. I normally only saw my parents and brother on holidays, like the rest of the family. Then I lost my work and couldn't afford my condominium. I had to sell almost everything I owned because if I didn't downsize drastically, I'd end up homeless. But I had a plan. I had a truck, so I got a $1,000 scamper in decent condition and installed it on my truck so I could live in it for a bit. It was supposed to be temporary, but I ended up living in it for much longer than I had anticipated. I was hoping to be able to live out of the camper at my parents' house, where my brother and his family also dwell. But when I asked my parents if I might stay for a while, they said they had a full house and wouldn't let me remain unless I paid them exactly what it would cost to rent an apartment in the region. That was far too much. just to park my camper. My folks termed my camper an eyesore and urged me to take a walk because we couldn't agree. My sister-in-law found it absolutely humorous. I had to live in a camper van. My brother joined her in pointing at and insulting me, calling me a homeless bum. To sleep the first night, I parked my truck camper in a store parking lot. Finding a permanent location to park was challenging, and I had to deal with a variety of issues, ranging from beggars and substance abusers to individuals demanding I leave, because my camper was an eyesore. When I eventually got a new job after months of looking, I basically lived in the rear lot of the building, near the warehouse and old employee parking places. My boss, the firm owner, appreciated this arrangement because I was willing to work any shift I could obtain as long as I got enough sleep. I was almost always available when they needed me, and worked nearly every day of the week. I earned a lot of overtime pay, and learned new skills from other employees. Eventually, midway through this year, I secured a better position in the company as a supervisor, and began earning a higher pay than my previous employment. That's when I decided I wanted a home. The scare I experienced from losing my condo made me realize I wanted something far more dependable in the long run. I looked about for something close to work, and discovered a 3-bedroom manufactured home on a small plot of land just 2 miles away. I was able to purchase it for $10,000 less than the asking price. I used virtually all of my savings for a down payment and was approved for a home loan. I didn't have to live in a camper any longer. There was enough room for me to park my pickup behind the home and unhook the camper to set it up in the backyard. When I was completely situated in the house, I was foolish enough to boast about it in my book of faces. My family saw the post, and that's where everything all started. After a few weeks, my parents and brother, along with his family, paid me an unannounced visit to take a tour of my home. I did not even give them my address, so I am still not sure how they found out where I reside. None of my pals have confessed, and no family members have previously visited me, so I'm wondering whether they trailed me at work and followed me home. It would really not surprise me. When I opened the door, they virtually all pushed their way in like rowdy tourists. Then they simply began making themselves at home. They all continued to poke around, and my sister-in-law flashed me a weird smirk. It wasn't until later that I realized why it irritated me more than a bull on steroids, who had just been stung by a hornet. My parents were continually telling me how much extra space I have today, which is too much for someone like me who doesn't have a wife or children. Sure, not now, but perhaps later. My brother kept noting how there was more space than at our parents' house, and that my place was closer to his employment, which raised red flags all around. My brother eventually asked me to speak quietly. Everyone else abruptly left the room and piled onto the front porch. That's when I realized they had planned something. My brother Dan claimed the house was too big for me alone, therefore, I should let him move in with his family because his wife is expecting a child. Hashtag 4. He pointed out that I already had the camper and could just live in it outside. They dwell in the main home. Dan never mentioned offering rent. Mind you, he has a nice job. He also mentioned that there will be adjustments, including curfews, and that I wouldn't be able to stroll in at any time without prior warning if it wasn't my brother. I believe the person I was speaking with had lost their mind, but Dan had lost his marbles long before. Our parents treated him as if he were the center of the world. I tried to speak, but he kept talking over me, as if I had no say in the situation. There was no way I was going to rent out my house or sections of it to him. Other people, perhaps only so I can pay off my mortgage more easily, but certainly not him or his ugly wife. I've seen videos of this similar circumstance many times online, and I never imagined I'd be in it, because it seemed so ridiculous. But my dad, brother, and sister-in-law all meet the description of a bunch of narcissistic, entitled freaks. So I grabbed up my phone, set it to record, and just held on to it. Dan didn't appear to care or realize that I'd done this, and instead, sat there with his arms waving around, talking about all the reasons he wanted my house. Then he moved from saying that to appearing as if it was a done deal and reaching out to shake my hand. That's when I finally showed my backbone and screamed, "Hell no." I said it loudly enough for Dan to stumble backward for a second. I had rarely raised my voice to him at that level, since I was reprimanded by our parents whenever I did. But this was my house, not theirs. My spine can shine as much as it wants here. I told him that my house was not for sale, and acting as if I would let him move in just because he wanted to won't make it happen. I bought my house for myself, and it is not my fault. He keeps having children and needs to continue living with our parents, since he cannot afford to move away. Dan, God came as close to me as he could without actually touching me, telling me that I didn't deserve the house, and that he needed a better place for his family to dwell. I laughed in his face and told him that was complete BS. I worked hard to be able to purchase my home. Of course, I earned it. Dan began ranting that I don't have a wife or children, and don't need all the room, so I might as well give it to him. I told him I wouldn't give him anything, and he never offered to pay my rent if I let him move in. Even if I couldn't live in my own house, I'd still have to pay the entire mortgage. Dan then informed me that he shouldn't have to pay rent because his family comes first, and our parents assured me that I would do this and that. I yelled as if their word were law, telling Dan that they didn't have the right or ability to give him my house. That's right. My parents and sister-in-law barged back in through the front door and encircled me in an attempt to force me to agree. There was a lot of battling, but to summarize, from this moment forward, I heard the phrase "just do it for Dan." There were more times in the fight than I can remember. I told them all that they had no say in my life or my house and should leave before I called the cops. Sister-in-law screamed the loudest at me about becoming pregnant again, and I can't do this to her. I said I did nothing to her. She basically felt she could take and take from me, as if I would just accept it. I had no obligations to her or her family. Then I labeled her a stuck-up shrew who never respected me. So I do not care what she thinks or how many children she has. I have no pity for her. She will not be living at my house. Well, that enraged her enough to assault me. She landed a nice strike on my face and attempted to do more, but my brother held her back, kicking and shouting. She continued demanding. He let her go only so she could scratch my eyes out. The phone I was carrying captured almost everything, so I held it up and threatened to call the police if they didn't leave right away. My parents informed Dan that they were leaving. Then my mother told me I had a week to come to my senses. I told her I wouldn't be there and not to return. I informed my sister-in-law that my phone filmed everything, and that if she tried anything, I would file charges for assault. She screamed at me before storming out, crying with her face in her hands. My mother was the last one out the door, telling me that I should do this for Dan and my sister-in-law. I told her I wouldn't be after I kicked out my parents, brother, and sister-in-law for attempting to force me to give up my new house to my brother. I instantly went to social media and shared the news with the entire family. I posted about it because I knew the first thing my family would do when they returned home was try to distort the event to make me the villain, which they did, but it was too late. Everyone had already believed me. After a week, my parents showed up with Dan on my front porch, just as they had promised in their previous ultimatum. They rang my doorbell repeatedly and hammered on the door until I replied. I opened it just a crack, and they tried to push their way back in, but I put a couple of latch chains to keep them out, and I leaned my body against the door for good measure. My father and brother begged me to allow them in, but I refused, saying I was filming everything and would call the cops if they tried to break in again. My mother, in her sickly sweet tone, asked if I was prepared to let my brother move in. I warned them to off and never return. My mother shed crocodile tears and questioned why I couldn't just do this for Dan, my loving brother. I laughed and then honestly stated, I do not love him as a brother because he mistreated me for years, and they only encouraged him to do so. They're bad parents, and he has a dreadful brother. Then I told him to leave because I'd be calling the cops as soon as possible. They all left with unexpected ease. I thought the whole thing was over, but maybe I should have taken them more seriously, because they had other ridiculous intentions. I returned home later that week, on Friday evening, to discover a moving truck and my brother's minivan parked in my driveway. Dan and his family were moving in. He simply waved to me with a poop-eating grin. When I saw him, I was enraged and ordered his family to stop. But my sister-in-law smugly told me that, like it or not, they were moving in the most false way possible, tilting her head and puckering her lips. She said that it was fine since my mother had permitted it, and that I should always listen to what my mother says. I was enraged just hearing those words and seeing her arrogant, spiteful expression. So I locked myself in my truck and called the cops right away. When they learned what I was doing, my sister-in-law began hammering on my window, yelling at me to stop and saying that I couldn't do this to her, since her family needed the house more than I did. She wailed, "Why don't you just do this for Dan?" I responded, "F Dan, it's my damn house, not his." She then threatened to key the side of my truck unless I stopped calling the cops. The 911 operator could hear everything because the window was slightly open. I told my sister-in-law that if she wrecked my truck, I would sue her, and she was clever enough to back down. When the cops arrived, Dan's entire family had locked themselves inside my home. I informed the cops what had transpired and showed them my new driver's license, which included my current address. When we got to my front door, I noticed that they had changed the lock, and the old lock was resting on the porch with the middle drilled out. The drill they used was lying right next to it. Could they have been any more dumb to leave evidence out like that? I pointed out the damaged lock and drill, then gave the cops a recap of what had happened before. Dan must have phoned our parents over after I returned home, because they arrived while I was speaking with the cops. My parents instantly lied, claiming that I consented to rent my house to my brother and his family. I stated that it was an easily proven untruth in one form or another. So Dan and his sister-in-law finally emerged from my house, carrying some papers. They both appear smug, as if they have outsmarted me. They had actually created and printed a forged rental agreement, but my signature was not on it. There was one, but it didn't look like my handwriting. I told my dad and Dan that it was ridiculously obvious fraud, and that if the cops investigated, they'd easily figure it out. And I doubt that going to jail in court will help them. It could possibly cost Dan his work, which is his only source of income for his family. I also stated that if anything of mine was lost, stolen, or broken, I would seek legal counsel and file a lawsuit for damages, as well as notify CPS. Dan turned white and appeared terrified when I repeated all of it. But my mother intervened, insisting that I do this for Dan and live in the camper so they could finally have a family home to themselves. I exclaimed at her that if she thought it was such a great idea, she could do it herself and give Dan her house instead. The cops separated my mother from me, and I told them that unless they all left right away, I would press charges. I shouted about how they hammered out the latch on my front door to break in. The leasing documents were unmistakably fraudulent. They poorly falsified my signature, and I have a video of my sister-in-law beating me. These are felonies. I could take over their lives if I chose. And if they don't go, that is exactly what I will do. The only reason I hadn't done it sooner was for Dan's children. So they only have one chance to get the F out. When my parents heard that, I believe they realized they couldn't force me to do it for Dan. My mother succumbed and stated that she would put an end to this. Then she went over to my sister-in-law and spoke quietly with her for a minute, while my father spoke to Dan. My sister-in-law immediately began crying and ripping up the fake rental papers into tiny bits and tossing them like confetti, only to have an officer tell them to pick up the bits of paper, or he would cite them for littering. Dan had to start asking his children to pack their belongings back into the moving truck. The kids were all crying, and the eldest was sobbing because he wouldn't be able to have his own room now. My sister-in-law and Dan gathered their children to try one last weak attempt to guilt me with a sad family ritual. You know how they all come together in a sort of group hug, all looking in the same direction? I swear, I believe they practiced it beforehand. All of the kids have the same begging expression and quivering lips. Sister-in-law kept touching her pregnant belly and tilting her head to resemble a sorrowful puppy. My brother just made the saddest face he could and said, "Please do not do this. We should be able to live here." But I didn't blame her and urged them to continue packing. Dan yelled at me after all the kids and sister-in-law cried so much. "Are you pleased with yourself? You've denied it everything because you're too selfish to share and help your family." I ended up laughing like a lunatic and retorting that all he was attempting to do was take, not share. And no amount of tears will make me let his family move in, since he is no longer my brother. He's just an entitled jerk who believes he can take whatever he wants from me. Like when we were kids, Dan started F-bombing me until the cops told him to stop or he'd be in handcuffs regardless of whether I filed charges. He sucked in his lips, his expression a mixture of fear and rage. I asked the cops if they could stay until my parents, brother, and sister-in-law had left. Fortunately, they stated that they had no intention of moving anywhere until this was handled. In fact, 2 cops turned into 4 in the next few minutes as more cars arrived. For whatever reason, this gave my parents an extra push to get started. I insisted Dan give me the keys to the new lock he installed on my front door, though I purchased another lock the next day anyway, because I wasn't sure if he had duplicate keys or not. He was quite reluctant to hand them over. Then, instead of handing them to me, he flung them down the street and into a storm drain, telling me to go get them myself. But one of the cops chastised him for it and ordered him to go collect them. He had to remove the grate off to get to them, and he got somewhat dirty in the process. When he got the keys back, he snarled and slammed them down in my hand. I then told everyone to go and never come back. My mother warned I'd be disowned for this, as if it were a threat to me, so I told them. Then, in an extremely sarcastic tone, I said, "Oh no, that means I won't be able to attend any holidays with you, when I am always treated brutally by you all, because Dan has always been your clear favorite. You guys treated me so poorly as I grew up that if Dan ever needed an organ donor, I would refuse to give him anything. So do what you always taught me to do when I was abused by all of you. Suck it up." My parents were taken aback when I said all of that, and the quartet of cops looked quite scornful at them as well. My mother began crying and walked away. My father stood there, looking like he wanted to punch me. Dan was just holding his children in defeat, and my sister-in-law was throwing a tantrum on my front lawn. They quickly formed a line, handed out boxes, and left my house with their belongings. Nothing had been unpacked yet, so everything was pulled out immediately. But as I was doing it, my mother continued telling me that it wasn't too late and that I could still do it for Dan, each time attempting to negotiate more and more in order to get me to reconsider. She said Dan could pay the rent if I let them stay. When that didn't work, she suggested I move back in with them and let Dan rent my house so I didn't have to share the building. I told her to shut up and continue packing boxes, because I don't want Dan or his family around. I don't want his money, and I never want to live with him or my parents again after how they treated me as a child. Cutting a bargain with my parents would be like cutting a deal with the devil for me. After hearing that, my sister-in-law threw another tantrum, tossed a box down, and sat on the ground to have a pity party since she didn't want to return to living with my parents. She was just there, enraged, until everyone else had done. They eventually moved everything out of the house and into the truck. So, before they went, they had one last conversation with my parents about everything they put me through growing up, and with 4 cops standing there, they couldn't do much but stand there and take it for once. I even complained that they couldn't just do something kind for me, like let me stay with my camper while I was homeless and trying to get back on my feet. How did they let Dan and my sister-in-law mock and label me a bum? So, who is the bum now? They wanted to kick me out of my home, so Dan could stay there for free. However, when I needed a place to stay, they wanted to charge me more than I could afford simply to park my camper, because they knew I was out of work. I asked them what I had done beyond being born to deserve being treated so horribly. Because when I finally achieve any success in life, they want to take it away from me for their favorite child, as they'd rather I give everything to Dan and have nothing for myself. I bought my house using the money I earned. I owe them nothing, and I will never ask for anything from them again, because they clearly see me as nothing more than a doormat or a cash cow. I received no responses from them. They just stood there, like fish out of water. So I kept yelling and asking them what in God's name made them believe they were such terrific parents. After all of that, my father was flushed, but more from shame than rage. This time, my mother sobbed that she was a terrible person. I openly agreed that she is a bad person, but if I had called them out on all of this in private rather than in public, they would have gotten angry at me and acted as if I was wrong. They simply maintained the denial for so long that it became ingrained in their personality. Dan and his family avoided me completely as they finished packing everything back into the moving truck. I made certain that nothing of mine was stolen before they left. They all got back into their cars, and my sister-in-law just remained there staring at me with hate until my brother finally convinced her to drive the minivan home. As soon as they were gone, I went back online and spilled the beans about what had transpired. My parents were too humiliated to justify their behavior this time. Regardless of how many times my parents tried, we did it for Dan Line. No one was listening anymore. Around that time, I offered to entertain half of the family for Christmas Eve at my new home. My folks weren't invited. Surprisingly, I wasn't banned on my brother and sister, and I'm quite sure they knew I was watching because my sister-in-law kept making passive-aggressive messages every few weeks about not having enough space while living with my parents, most likely to see if she could still guilt me. I'm sure it's driving my folks crazy because they're not getting any peace and quiet in their old age. With 3 boisterous children, a mentally unstable sister-in-law, my golden child brother, and a newborn infant all in the house at once. Perhaps they could relocate into a camper in their own backyard and let Dan take over their entire house. They could find some serenity then. Yes, they could do that for Dan. My golden child brother took my Taylor Swift tickets, which I had saved enough to buy a new laptop, so I sold it on eBay and retained the proceeds. My parents always prioritized my brother above me because they wanted a boy. I've heard relatives express how upset they were with me but got overjoyed when their second child was a boy. They never purchased me any toys that I wanted or begged for, but they did have a whole room full of boys' toys. They bought him a phone when he was 14, but I had to work and get my own, since they didn't trust me. They actually sent us to different schools, so they wouldn't have to pay a higher tuition for me. Unfortunately, my brother picked up on these habits and assumed that I was meant to be treated poorly. He was continuously getting me in trouble by lying about my actions. When I was 8 years old, he threw a baseball at our television. He recognized he would get in trouble and pretended that I was the one who broke it. I tried to explain to my parents that I was playing with a doll in my room and had never touched a baseball in my life, but they did not believe me. I was sent to bed hungry because they said troublemakers don't eat dinner in this house. Another time, when I was 14, I wanted to go to a boy's birthday party since I liked him and had my parents' permission. But my brother informed them that I was already dating and that the party was a ploy to meet up with him. He attended a different school and had no idea who the guy was, but my parents continued to believe in the grounded me. I was devastated when that happened since I assumed the entire school would despise me for failing to attend, despite having been asked. Thankfully, they were quite understanding and did not blame me. Plus, I started dating that man. I started shoveling snow off our neighbor's lawn and trimming their grass to save money for a phone. My parents insisted that I do the same for our yard, and they refused to pay me because it was my responsibility. I listened to them because being grounded meant wasting time in my bedroom, something I did not desire. Fortunately, I was able to purchase a smartphone when I turned 17. My parents never bothered exchanging numbers with me, but by that point, I had ceased caring. They would occasionally imply that a girl doesn't deserve her own phone, because she can't be trusted, which sounded silly to me. Anyway, since I purchased it on my own, they couldn't do anything about it. Now I'm a huge Taylor Swift fan, and attending one of her concerts is my goal. I learned long ago that she was going to play near my city, so I started saving money to buy tickets. I had found a new job at a high-end fast food restaurant and was being paid hourly, so I began working additional shifts. However, it wasn't sufficient. The selling date for the tickets was approaching, and I hadn't saved enough money. If it were the following week, I would have been paid again and had the necessary amount, but it wasn't. And I knew that if I didn't buy them on the first day, the price would quadruple. My partner, the same guy whose birthday celebration I couldn't attend, knew how badly I wanted to go. He said he'd gladly pay me the remaining cash, and I was able to purchase a ticket on time. I was very excited to go, because he had also purchased one for himself. So we'd be there together. But I made a terrible error by discussing it at home. A few days later, I returned home from work to discover that my concert ticket was missing. I looked all over the house, including beneath my bed, but I couldn't find it. So I decided to check the teddy bear camera I had purchased for my room, as I knew I had placed my ticket in a location where the camera could see it. To my complete surprise, my brother had just strolled into my room and seized it like he owned it. I confronted him about it right away, and while he denied doing it, I showed him the evidence on my phone. He tried to grab it from my hand so he could delete the tape, but I had quicker reflexes and evaded it. I informed him that he needed to return it to me, or I'd report him. He just started laughing and asked, "Are you crazy? I sold it since Taylor Swift concert tickets are currently selling for a fortune." Then he pointed to his new laptop and explained that he had spent the money he received on it, so there was nothing I could do. I ran to my parents and told them about it, but they dismissed it as nothing. What's the big deal if your brother took it? A laptop is far more helpful than a concert ticket. Therefore, he effectively saved you money. I knew my family had always treated me horribly, but I never expected them to go this far. They knew how much I admired Taylor Swift and how important this was to me, yet none of them cared. Because I had everything on film, I could definitely denounce my boyfriend to the police and get him detained, but then my parents would bail him out, and the story would end there in my head. I had just squandered the money my boyfriend had given me, and I felt awful about it. So I determined to make my brother pay. I waited for him to go out with his pals before sneaking into his room. I took his laptop, along with a box and charger, because it was spanking new, and in case he had a camera, I posed with a peace sign. I instantly Googled the price, which was, unexpectedly, higher than the cost of my single ticket. I placed it up on eBay and lowballed it by $150, and I had an offer the following day. Within hours, his new laptop was gone, and I had the cash in my hand. I went over to my boyfriend's house to explain the problem. He stated he didn't care about the money, and was only upset that I didn't get the opportunity. So he handed me a ticket. I thanked him profusely, and instructed him to keep all of the money and the ticket for the time being, as my brother may attempt to take it by force. When I arrived home, my brother was already yelling and informing my parents that I had stolen his laptop. He had no evidence, yet they believed him and instructed me to return it immediately. I refuted the accusation, but they labeled me a thief and threatened to contact the police. So I said, "Okay, let's call the police. I have evidence of my brother stealing. Therefore, he will be the first to be arrested." How do you think the arrest will affect his prospective college applications? When I arrived home, my brother was already yelling and informing my parents that I had stolen his laptop. He had no evidence, yet they believed him and instructed me to return it immediately. I refuted the accusation, but they labeled me a thief and threatened to contact the police. So I said, "Okay, let's call the police. I actually have evidence that my brother stole, so he'll be the first one arrested." How do you think the arrest will affect his prospective college applications? Everyone but my brother fell silent. He began calling me things such as useless, ungrateful, and even the B word. But, for the first time ever, my parents told him to keep quiet. They understood his chances of getting into a major college were slim. The second I reported him for theft, they simply instructed me to go to my room and said that I was grounded for my impolite behavior. But I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I'd fought back against my family and triumphed. I was so excited that I leaped on the bed and danced like a lunatic. They observed how happy I was and decided to cease preparing meals for me. They also refused to let me cook because they presumably owned the supplies and utensils. I didn't have any money with me, so I returned to my boyfriend's apartment the next day. My parents tried to stop me, but I explained that I was going to get some food. When I arrived at my destination, I was met with a wonderful surprise. My boyfriend's parents greeted me warmly and informed me that they had prepared a meal for me because their son had anticipated this event. They said I could stay there for as long as I wanted, and they wouldn't tell my parents. I'm turning 18 in a few months, and my boyfriend has asked me to move in with him in the new apartment he's buying. I do not believe anyone has ever said yes as many times as I did. His parents were watching this moment, and I just burst into tears. I told them that I wished I had been born into their family because I despised mine. But they did not condemn me and remarked that I would become their family anyhow, which made me and my partner flush. So, certainly, I'll have to go back there since I'm still a minor, but I believe my life is no longer filled with misery. I've been discriminated against my entire life because of my golden child sister. She now attempted to walk down the aisle at my wedding, and I finally got payback. My parents have always loved and pampered my sister, as if she were a golden child. They didn't even try to be subtle, because every time I accused her of stealing my clothes, they refused to believe me. But if she said I took her toilet paper, I'd be grounded. Even if there was undeniable proof, they'd give her a lighter punishment and try to criticize me at the same time. My birthday cake had to be in a flavor she wanted. My parents always denied knowing I disliked that style of cake. Our family trips were always to places she wanted, even if it was an event meant for me. My sister grew up privileged and did not like me. She only used me as a punching bag. Initially, she ignored me, but as we grew older, things became more difficult. My parents loved to brag about her accomplishments, but never mention any problems. Yet they loved to point out any shortcomings in me as mocking material. She had no friends in high school, which did not surprise me. My parents had indulged her, making her too shy to interact with others. While I was quite popular, she considered this unacceptable. And after lying to my parents that all of my friends were substance users, I was barred from remaining friends with anyone. My extended family saved me from complete seclusion. The majority of my family lived in the same town, and despite our age gaps, I got along well with my cousins. They asked me over to one of their gatherings, and I told them about how I was forbidden from leaving the house. When asked why my children behaved without filters, I said that I wasn't permitted to have friends because my sister didn't. My parents found out fast and got into a heated battle with our extended family, and as predicted, I was grounded for complaining. My sister's situation worsened, so she transferred schools. I suppose she was humiliated by her extended family, knew her social status was low, and requested that it be rectified. My parents instantly agreed, even though it would cost them more because the school was further away. My sister made pals at her new school. I expected her to lighten up on me, but it only made matters worse. Her pals would come over and bully me, which my parents referred to as teasing. I never invited friends over since my parents were terrible hosts, and my sister would accuse them of stealing things, which they believed. However, I grew close to my cousins, owing to my parents' unwillingness to interfere with them. I was gradually coming to believe that my life was back on track, especially now that I had a boyfriend. But I had no idea that my sister would also spoil this. I didn't want to bring him home at all, but once my parents found out, they insisted. We arrived at my doorstep. My sister had been looking at him since the minute he entered. When we were separated, he returned to locate me and told me that my sister was flirting with him. He claimed that woman came over wearing revealing attire, batting her eyelids, and began telling him how horrible I was and how amazing she was at intimacy. He said he didn't want to hear any more of it and came to see me. I told him to leave and that I was going to confront her about it. When I confronted her about it in front of my parents, my sister told them a different story. My boyfriend had attempted to flirt with her instead, but she naturally declined because she would never do that to me. I forgot how favored my sister was, and of course everyone supported her. My boyfriend wasn't ideal, but I instantly trusted him. No insult to her, but she had the same physique as my parents, who were overweight. I knew my boyfriend would never try to cheat on my model physique with my sisters. I battled back and forth with them, but my parents forbade me from dating such a bad boy. We tried to keep our connection a secret but failed, because my partner became touchy. I occasionally dated a different guy, but history repeated itself, and the same tale played out. I tried to explain how this happened again, but they felt that meant I was incapable of making good decisions and continued to choose awful men. My new boyfriend was traumatized by this incident and broke up with me. My sister dubbed me the high school slut, and I struggled to form new relationships. For once in her life, she turned the tables. My sister brought her first boyfriend home from the moment he entered the house. He was overwhelmed with stories about my sister. After 2 hours of dull anecdotes about my sister, I could tell that her boyfriend was eager to leave as soon as he could. My parents approached me and asked, "Why can't I be like my sister and find someone like that?" Their romance lasted 3 days because the poor guy couldn't bear that much weight on his shoulders, both physically and mentally. Years have passed, and things stay the same. I was certain that this was the worst that could happen, but little did I realize that my parents and sisters had something worse in store for me. Part 2. My sister graduated from high school, and you would think she would be more mature for college, but she remained the same. She was accepted to college, but did not have any scholarships to help with her finances. Her school grades were poor because we would all celebrate if she had an A, which was rare. My parents would gather our entire family just to celebrate this. My parents understandably celebrated and promised to pay for everything. I believed her college departure would be the best thing for me, but it turned out to be the start of a very difficult period for me. My mother eventually approached me to discuss my forthcoming high school graduation. She informed me that because they were paying for my sister's education, they didn't have enough money to pay for mine. So it would be best if I started working right away after graduation and waited until my sister graduated university to see if they could afford anything for me. This basically meant that I could either attend college with student loans or take 4 years off and live at their house, where they also required me to pay rent. It was clear that she was attempting to get me to throw a fit, since she didn't like my straightforward response. I told Mom I was all right not going to university because I never wanted to go in the first place. This was an outright falsehood, but I figured I could turn her comments against her. My father later attempted to get on my nerves with my mother, but he failed as well. After a lifetime of poor upbringing, I had no expectations for my education. After a few years of hard effort, I was awarded a scholarship. Not to the Ivy League, but it was a decent course with a full scholarship. Knowing my sister would despise it and try to stop me, I shared my accomplishment on social media at the same time. I told them, and I pushed myself to thank them in the post. They couldn't stop me from going since they had to explain to the family. Why not? I suppose my sister eventually got to them, and they switched tactics and asked whether I was sure I wanted to go. They informed me that my sister wasn't doing well in college, and that because she was brighter and had better judgment than me, I would suffer more. I lied to them, claiming that my classes were easier and that I would be fine. They didn't agree with my decision, but they couldn't stop me. College turned out to be my rescue, and I was finally happy. I still communicated with my parents and visited them on holidays, but because they refused to pay for anything during this time, I avoided introducing anyone to them. And I'm glad I did, because this man eventually became my husband. Unfortunately for my family, my husband was the type of person who enjoyed drama. He will not forgive or forget, and he is probably plotting retribution. People were taken aback when I met him because of our vastly different personalities. Most people thought he was an aggressive man, yet he was the sweetest person if you treated him with respect. When we talked about marriage, we decided we didn't care about the ceremony because of our budget, which we'd rather spend on our honeymoon. We sent out the engagement announcement and saved the date for a few months later. My folks had no idea and naturally demanded to meet my man. I tried to grow a spine and reject, but it was difficult. The distance had made me wonder if my folks were really that horrible. When my husband looked as if I had canceled Christmas, I told him I'd make sure they were never alone with him. He had been preparing for this because he knew what to expect. He even purchased a high-quality recorder. He could hide in a pocket and record everything. He was ecstatic, as he considered all of the ways he could reject my sister's efforts, insult her, and then distribute the tape of her attempts to my family. I declined to accompany him, so he went alone, eager to meet them. When he returned an hour later, he had the most ecstatic expression on his face. Before I could say anything, he began shouting, the baby would not believe what they wanted. We have plenty of opportunity to invite them over. I was perplexed and wanted to hear the recording, but he said I should listen to him first or else I would misunderstand him. As I listened to his narrative, I understood that picking this man as my husband was the best decision I had ever made. Part 3. My husband was the best thing that ever happened to me, and I was relieved that someone would finally stand up for me. He went over to my parents' place to meet them, and when he got back, he informed me how many times we could have them over. I asked him to explain what he meant, and he started telling me what happened. My parents were not particularly pleased with my spouse, due to his pushy personality. But they stated that they are willing to pay for my wedding on one condition. My sister would go down the aisle first at my wedding, dressed in a wedding gown. My husband inquired as to why, and they explained that it was not appropriate for a younger sister to marry first. Therefore, it was only fair that my sister had some experience with it. My spouse told me that he filmed the entire conversation with a grin. He did not try to say no to my parents since he was plotting retribution. My husband informed me that this was an excellent opportunity for revenge, which helped me get out of a bad mood. We had a great time brainstorming ways to screw them over. When we had settled on a course of action, we summoned his considerably more composed sibling. It involved having two venue addresses and giving them the incorrect one. My husband's brother chastised us for this notion, calling it unethical and disgusting. Instead, we decided to invite my parents to hire security and not allow them in. We also devised the greatest plan to convince my parents to pay for the most extravagant wedding we could afford. My husband went back to my parents and stated he was willing to accept their offer, even if I didn't like it. He pointed out that I dislike conflict. Therefore, if I was shocked by it, I wouldn't throw a tantrum in front of everyone. My husband brought up the topic of remuneration after that was agreed upon. He explained that if they paid for the wedding, I would feel even greater pressure to keep quiet. After my husband and father shook hands, I noticed my older sister skipping with joy in the video for any conversation regarding my sister walking down the aisle before me. He would go over to their house to talk, and thus began months of deception. My parents and sister felt they were deceiving me while my husband and I were milking them. We decided that my husband and sister would go over the food and decoration options, with my husband always pointing out the cheapest option available. He'd then sigh and add, "It's a shame we don't want to take advantage of my parents' generosity, so we don't have the best options." My sister expected to be a large part of our wedding, so she demanded that my parents pay for the best. My parents would then encourage my husband not to worry and offer to pay for the most expensive option. We did the same thing with the photographers, the DJ, and many other superfluous items. Throughout the process, my sister flirted with my husband, since she believed she was marrying him. My husband acted conflicted and maintained a safe distance from them. My spouse informed me that he enjoyed fooling them more than arranging our wedding. We were sitting and thinking about how we had transformed our low-budget wedding into the most spectacular conceivable. After a few days, it was finally time for our wedding. My husband and I were more excited about deceiving my parents than about the wedding event, but I never anticipated things would go so well. Part of our wedding had been meticulously planned, and our revenge was ready to be carried out. My husband and family had devised what they felt was an ideal plan. They wanted my sister to arrive at the ideal time to walk down the aisle, so that they could avoid talking to me. My husband and I made an effort to keep our security disguised at first. As the guests and my parents arrived, all they could see was a woman holding a list of names to check. Only after my parents had come and seated down did we call for security. We instructed them not to accept anyone. My sister agreed to provide a generous tip if he didn't tell. We told him that a few minutes later, my parents received a text message from my sister indicating that she was 5 minutes away. My father stepped up and made some head signals, and my bridesmaids quickly followed suit. After everyone had gone down and taken their seats, my father stood up at the door, as if waiting for me. A friend who knew about the plan emailed me and instructed me to get ready as soon as my father assumed his position. The bridal song began playing, the doors opened, and I walked inside. My father was taken aback when he learned it was me instead of her golden kid. He attempted to look at the venue entrance for my sister, but she was nowhere to be found. At this point, he was supposed to lead me down the aisle, but he did not. He received a phone call from someone who used it as an excuse to leave and murmured that something came up. There were gasps and confusion around. A friend who was present loudly inquired as to what had occurred. I lied, and in a tearful voice, he told me that I wasn't supposed to be there. The companion then said loudly, "What did he mean by it shouldn't be you?" So that as many people as possible could hear and share it. My husband's father rushed forward and seized my arm. I walked down the altar in murmurs while others talked about what had happened. My husband and I deserved an Oscar for how brilliantly we cried. Fake tears. My parents never returned, and they missed my marriage. Nobody dared to tell me what was occurring, but someone did. He whispered in my ear that he needed to go to the bathroom, or he'd burst out laughing. Our idea had worked. I was told that my sister did appear in a bridal gown. The security refused to let her in until my father went there and threatened him, with police claiming he had never heard of him. The security had no objections to the cops arriving, because he had been recruited by us at the time. My dad knew it was too late and demanded that he let my sister in. My father rushed after my husband, who feigned to be bewildered. He denied ever agreeing to something that foolish with my parents in front of everyone else. When they insisted he did, he requested proof, which they obviously couldn't find. My sister yelled and cried as she sat on the floor, thrashing her legs like a child. My father appeared to have beaten my husband, but security and others intervened. The venue had cameras, but they wouldn't show me the footage of my father beating my husband. However, several people recorded films and even shared them online. Watching my parents and sister be pulled apart by anyone and everyone who came out to check out the drama was delightful. After years of being accused and not believed, watching them taste was one of the nicest wedding gifts. My mother cried. My dad continued turning from purple to white, and my sister remained on the floor, wailing and shouting. They insisted that my spouse was involved, but some questioned why he would consent. Why was there no proof? And why did they want my sister to do this at my wedding? They were told to leave and had no choice but to comply. My father supposedly had to drag my sister off, because she refused to leave the ground. Their taxi arrived, and as my father entered, he stated, "You guys are going to pay me back every penny." We were relieved that he was gone, and we all returned to enjoying our marriage.